Hey, welcome to the final PowerPoint and material for the lymphatic system, the homeostatic imbalances of the lymphatic system. First thing I want to tell you before you watch this is that there will be some pictures within this of some parts of the body, some actual pictures, maybe some blood. So just be aware and maybe click past those if you can't handle it. Other than that, it should not be too long. I'm only going to focus on a few things to finish off this unit. The first one is metastasis. Some people say metastasis. And you may have heard of this before because it is the spread of disease. So, disease starts in one part of the body and then it spreads elsewhere. Most commonly, this word is associated with cancer. And many of our most dangerous cancers spread through metastasis. How? Well, it could happen through the blood, but a lot of the time, um, the disease or the cancerous cells are carried by lymphatic vessels. It's been a while since we talked about lymphatic vessels, but that goes all the way back to the first week of this unit when we were actually still in school, and how those lymphatic vessels pretty much travel everywhere and have 600 lymph nodes scattered throughout that circulation. So, oftentimes, malignant tumors, malignant cancers break off and spread to other parts of the body. And like I said, it could happen through blood, it could happen through lymph, and such that a lot of lymph nodes can become cancerous with specific cancers. For example, breast cancer. Oftentimes, breast cancer spread to lymph nodes in the armpits. How would you know that a lymph node was cancerous? It's larger. It's tender to the touch, and it starts to attach to structures that surround it. Oftentimes, they will do a biopsy of a lymph node to see if cancerous cells are in that lymph node. What are some common sites where cancer spread? And this is the top 5 list of places that cancers can spread. I already talked about the lymph nodes, but brain, the lungs. So lungs very oftentimes will have a spread. The liver, which would be seen as some doctors would call them spots on the liver, if you have spread of cancer to that. And then bone is some cancers can spread to bones. Lance Armstrong, famous bicycler, had testicular cancer, and that testicular cancer actually spread to almost all of these areas when he had that. And he went down to Indianapolis and actually got rid of that cancer. It was not predicted that he would get rid of it, but he did using some of the techniques you've heard about: chemo, radiation, etc. Now I want to take you. I want to show you what a cancerous lymph node looks like. This is one in someone's neck. We know we have a whole bunch of lymph nodes in our necks. So the actual lymph node is swollen up, it's inflamed, and would be tender to the touch. I do not personally know what cancer this one came from. We're going to jump around a lot today. Ruptured spleens. Remember, your spleen is one of the largest organs in your body. It's in your left upper quadrant. There are many ways you could rupture it. Often, for most people, the number one way to rupture it is just blunt force trauma, running into something, hitting your body in that left upper quadrant. My research says it's the most commonly injured organ in the abdomen. I don't know. I guess I have to believe that. I find that hard to believe. How many people do you know that have injured their spleen? I don't know too many. The problem with rupturing a spleen is that there's so much blood running through the spleen that it leads to immediately internal hemorrhaging, massive bleeding that is, and leads to hemorrhagic shock or um, hypovolemic shock. Oftentimes, the only way to solve the problem is a splenectomy, which is a surgery to remove the spleen. You can live without it. Your red bone marrow can take over some functions, and your liver can take over the functions. However, your immunity decreases, so you can't fight disease as well when you don't have your spleen. I wanted to show you a picture of a splenectomy, basically a spleen that has been removed. Check out how big this is. I mean, that would just outcompete most of the other abdominal organs. And I would imagine that this person actually had some type of blood cancer, and that's why the spleen is so large. Now, I'm going to show you some other pictures, just some things that can happen to our body when it comes to infection and disease. We've talked about abscesses before. An abscess is an infection that's kind of stuck in an area of the body. And so excess pus, it's confined, it can't get out, and it causes inflammation and pain. And oftentimes, as you can see, it has to be squeezed to get rid of that infection. An ulcer is just an open sore, and a lot of the time this could be due to a bacterial infection or a fungal infection, but most of the time it's due to a lack of blood flow in an area, so poor circulation, and that area starts to break down and possibly die while the rest of the person still continues to live. Then jumping around, HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. Is one of the most sinister viruses ever. We've talked a lot about COVID-19 in this unit. HIV is so sinister because it infects helper T cells. Now you got to go back. What do helper T cells do? Remember, these are the T cells that create the army of warrior cytotoxic T cells. So they create the army when we get infected. So essentially, this virus infects the cells, the T cells, that will make the cells to fight off the virus. And that's the major issue with HIV. When people get infected with HIV, they can make up to 10 billion viruses per day. The human body will attack the infected cells. Yeah, you will attack the infected cells, but over time, you'll stop being able to make cytotoxic T cells. As far as signs and symptoms go, there's the list. It's very typical of other viral diseases you get. The problem is HIV infections will eventually lead to AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, which basically means because you can't create that T cell army, you start to lose your immune system and other diseases can come in. Now, I keep this time frame up. If you do not take any type of antiviral drugs, you can go 2 to 10 years until you acquire AIDS. Nowadays, that is very rare in that you will not see, because of the antivirals, you'll see people who can live with HIV for 30 plus years and never get AIDS. And I've actually seen usually like a commercial per week on TV about some of these new antiviral that people with HIV can take. Opportunistic infections, once someone gets AIDS, can take over the body. So very commonly pneumonia can get in and impact people when they have AIDS, and actually cancer can get in and impact people when they have AIDS. I want to finish off this entire unit with a very common condition that Yorktown students have, and those are allergies, allergic reactions. By far the highest, the largest conditions of Yorktown students, and including myself. I've lived with allergies since the age of 2, and I'm allergic to many things. But there are 4 different types of allergies, and we'll get to those. Common allergens, you may be allergic to food. I am not. Some people cannot take antibiotics like amoxicillin, penicillin. Some people cannot get vaccines because they're allergic to eggs, and most vaccines are made with eggs. Venoms, a lot of people are allergic to snake venoms or bee venoms or wasp venoms. Myself, I'm allergic to plants, pollens, dusts, molds, fungi. I'm also allergic to. There are 4 different types of allergic reactions, and I want to go through these. The first one is called anaphylactic. We've seen that word before. It's also called a type 1 allergy, and we've actually mentioned this already with the antibody or immunoglobulin E, where you just have an overactive immune system, so you react to things in our environment. It leads to vasodilation. That's an expansion of blood vessels, so more blood flow to the area, bronchoconstriction, too much mucus, and what ends up happening because of that bronchoconstriction is most people wheeze, so they're also diagnosed with asthma. They can't breathe, and they get runny noses, and some people would call this hay fever or just your typical seasonal allergies. Some of you may have had this done. I've had this done where they actually go to your back and apply all of these things to your back to see how you react. The bigger the reaction you have, the more allergic you are to something. So for this person, you can see they're going to be very allergic to birch trees and live oak trees, Timothy grass, Johnson grass, Bermuda grass, Bahia grass. So this person would not want to roll around in the grass. They would get hives like this. Weeds, sage, looks like their biggest one. Indoor, looks like they're allergic to dust mites, which are the little creatures that eat dust. As far as cats, higher allergy to cats than dogs. And it looks like just mold, one mold they're allergic to. Second type of reaction is a cytotoxic or type 2 allergic reaction. We've talked about this one before. This is when we get a mismatched blood transfusion and we attack blood cells that have been put into our bodies. So quickly, I'm just not going to spend too much more time on this. It leads to hemolysis, where we attack our blood. A type 3 is called immune complex, and this is, I would say, a more rare type of allergy. Not everyone would get this one. It's where antibody antigen complexes get stuck in certain areas of the body, and it leads to some autoimmune disease where you attack your own body, like rheumatoid arthritis, which I'll show you a picture of here in a second, is where you would attack your joints. And here you go. So you can see over time the joints just severely get mangled, and obviously a person who had late rheumatoid arthritis would not be able to use their hands anymore. There are drugs to prevent this from happening. The fourth and final type of reaction is a cell-mediated or a type 4 allergy, and a lot of you may have gotten one of these already. It's a delayed hypersensitivity, which means you're exposed to something, and 1 or 2 days later, you actually show signs or symptoms of exposing yourself to that. So you're exposed to something, T cells go to that area of the body, and inflammation occurs at the entry points of your body. And the most common one is poison ivy, where you touch the oils on the leaf, and 1 or 2 days later, you start getting an inflammatory response on your hands or on somewhere on your skin where you touch those leaves. Some of you have also had the skin test for tuberculosis, where they put a tiny, a very subcutaneous shot on your forearm, and you go back to the doctor 2 days later, and if you're inflamed in that area, you've had TB. If not, you do not have TB. So poison ivy, stay away from the 3 leaves. Poison oak, 3 leaves. Poison sumac is a lot of leaves. And here's a poison ivy rash. Some of you have had this. I certainly have. About the only time I get poison ivy is when my dog walks through it and I pet my dog. And now a few days later, I get poison ivy on my fingers. It usually takes 2-3 weeks for your body to get rid of it. Some people will have to get some steroid shots. Some people would take calamine baths or put some calamine lotion on the rash to prevent themselves from having to itch and scratch it so much. So that is the final PowerPoint of the lymphatic system. Next, you'll take a little quiz over what I talked about today.